Okay, good morning, everyone. As you may know, next week on Tuesday is Veterans Day. So there's no class on Tuesday, and then the exam is on Thursday. So uh, I'd like to set some time aside for any review questions. We're doing the whole section on brains. We started with neurons and localism and holism. We saw how damage to different areas can affect the brain. We looked at split brain phenomena and discussed that in some depth. Also, hemispherectomies and the WADA test and what I think that has to say about consciousness and where it is in the brain. Uh, Craniopagus twins joined presumably by a thalamic bridge, who may be able to transfer uh, sensations or even thoughts, experiences, perhaps. And we looked at a lot more. We've been working on the McCulloch-Pitts neuron and how we might understand the brain as being a naturally occurring representational system made of neurons that enter different states in response to stimuli. And this view that Harnish calls simple detector semantics faces a bunch of challenges. We looked at three, and they're right here in front of us. So, any questions about any of that material or anything that you'd like me to say a little bit more about or go over? Just one moment of uncomfortable silence. Maybe it's comfortable for you. It's actually not uncomfortable for me. And good morning, Hind and Emily in the chat. Okay, it's pretty quiet. That is fine with me. I'm, you know when my office hours are. You also know that you can make appointments. So if you want to go over anything in an office hour, as long as time permits, we can do that. And if there aren't questions, then I'm going to send you to do an in-class writing assignment, and we'll meet in breakout rooms to to discuss. So one moment while I set that up. I still need to publish it. So one moment. Oh, before doing that, I want to share something with you. Okay, remember that these problems uh, they each have two names, and the last problem is known as the misrepresentation or disjunction problem. And if you take simple detector semantics seriously, then anything that you think might count as misrepresentation just gets pulled in to that system's representational content. So if you thought that the frog's fiber 2 was a bug detector, but something that's not a bug, like a moving magnet, triggers the bug detector, then we want to say, well, that's misrepresentation. But simple detector semantics says that it represents whatever activates it. Well, we're told that the moving magnet activates it. So then it's not just a bug detector, it's a bug or moving magnet detector. This is why it's called the disjunction problem, because you have or. Every time something triggers it, even if you think it's misrepresentation, it's a false positive, right? Yeah, the thing that triggered it becomes just more of what it's representing. And it's also called the misrepresentation problem because we think that with representation comes a possibility of misrepresentation. Now, I told you there's this vast literature on this. There are people in philosophy and biology and cognitive science who try to address this. And there's even a more interesting, broader issue about function in biology. So a lot of people say, well, the function of the heart is to circulate blood, and the function of the spleen is to do this and that, and it's hard to explain why, believe it or not. It's hard to give a um, unchallenged consensus explanation on why the heart's function is to circulate blood versus doing all the other things it does. It does a bunch of other things. It makes a rhythmic pounding sound, for example. And we all want to say, well, it's not there because it makes a sound, it's there because it circulates blood. And so we try to give evolutionary accounts. And it turns out there's just all kinds of weird problems that come up. So similarly, when you say frog's fiber 2 in the optic nerve, its function is to represent bugs, not moving magnets. It's hard to defend that claim without making some kind of ad hoc, patch up to your theory. Okay, so uh, Harnish looks at one such attempt. Let's just say units or sets of units. They don't just represent whatever turns them on. They represent whatever turns them on in the natural environment of the system. And that has problems. And there are two. First, even in natural environments, you have misrepresentation. So I give the example of maybe a twig gets caught in a spider web and it's a breezy day, so it's moving about intermittently, and the frog tries to eat it. And of course, there are animals that camouflage themselves and all kinds of. I mean, just a chaos of misrepresentation in the natural world. Animals eating things that are toxic and failing to eat something that would nourish them, and failing to understand that something's about to attack them. They can't even detect it, etc. Uh, and so we lose all that. That's weird. And then the second, we need an account of a natural environment, especially in a world where so much of the environment is no longer what you intuitively call the natural environment. So birds perch on telephone wires and signposts and all kinds of things that aren't, at least weren't originally part of their natural environment. Uh, Dogs eat out of dog dishes. They play fetch and catch balls. These things don't occur in the original natural environment. And if you want to update the natural environment to include the dog bowl and the fetch ball and the telephone wire, then why can't you include moving magnets? So these just look like no-goes. And again, I actually took more than one graduate seminar that explored these questions. And so you can take if you went into this, you could take seminars on what they call mental representation. And no one really has a good answer anymore. No one has any yet, I should say, to these questions. Now I'm reviewing that um, partly because it's more complex than the other objections, but also because I want to share with you a an example of frog misrepresentation. So this is like less than half a minute, and you don't want your volume up too high. So volume warning. Here we go. Of course, those aren't ants. Those are video images of ants, triggering something you might want to call an ant detector.
Ah! Ah! Ah!
Okay. So what would simple detector semantics say of that? It would say that the frogs, let's say it's fiber 2. I don't think this was the same species of frog, and right, but there's something presumably in the optic nerve, just like with the frogs that Letfin et al. Researched and studied. There's something in the optic nerve that is sensitive uh, to this kinds of visual stimuli, right? And we want to call it an ant detector, but according to simple detector semantics, it's an ant or video image of an ant detector. And then at the end, we find out, oh, and it's also an ant or video image of an ant or thumb detector, right? And we just want to avoid that. We want to say that when it was there's something mistaken about trying to eat the thumb, trying to eat the video image of the ant. Okay. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. Then let's do the discussion. And after writing, we will meet in breakout rooms. And I'm guessing that there will be a variety of views. Don't go to discussions just yet. Okay, this is discussion 4, and it should be published now. If you went prematurely, then you might have to refresh your screen. Interpreting split brain phenomena, hemispherectomies, and the WADA test. We've seen various interpretations of split brain phenomena and related phenomena. Michael Gazzaniga, at least back in 1985, around that time, held that the left hemisphere is conscious while other brain regions are not. V.S. Ramachandran, whom we saw in the video where he asks, can one hemisphere be a theist and the other hemisphere be an atheist, holds that a split brain patient has two independently conscious entities in the cranium, one for each hemisphere. And he's a neurologist. Michael Gazzaniga is a neuroscientist. Richard Swinburne is a philosopher. He holds that the entity that is conscious must be an immaterial soul in causal connection with some region of the brain. And that is known as dualistic interactionism, also sometimes goes by interactionist dualism. We discussed that long ago. And I give the analogy of the remote control toy or the Mars rover, right? To show that that's actually a testable claim. So by that standard, it's a scientific hypothesis. That's not to say that scientists believe it, but it's something you could do research on. I, James Blackman, find myself compelled to hold that certain brain regions, hemispheres included, are independently conscious even when intact. Uh, and there are others who hold this. Luke Roelofs is a philosopher uh, who wrote his thesis on this a few years after I published, and we've discussed this. Uh, and so it's gaining um, some attention. He's not the only one. And there are people such as Yair Pinto. I don't know if I say Yair or Yair. I don't know how to pronounce that. If you do, please let me know. Uh, whose presentation is in an optional video. So there's a presentation with David Chalmers, philosopher David Chalmers, hosting some talks by a few different people on split brain phenomena, and he gives his presentation there. And he holds that even in split brain cases, there is just one conscious individual. He thinks all that gets split is your perception, and there's just one person. The argument, honestly, is not especially persuasive. One of the claims, one of his premises is lots of people think of them as one person, and so we should kind of defer to their opinion that this is one person. He also claims that the split brain patient, um, uh, split brain patients themselves think of themselves as one person. Now, it might seem that way. I'm kind of surprised that he would say this, but of course, in the case of Joe, when Joe is asked, does it feel any different? He says it's just like having a backup brain. I don't feel any different. Well, as best as we can understand it, it's the left hemisphere saying that, right? So the left hemisphere is giving reports, not the other one in that case. Okay, so given what, here's where the assignment starts. Given what we've learned in class and your best understanding of the world, everything you know, what do you think is the thing or are the things that is our conscious? What is it that's really conscious right now for you? Do you agree with any of these theorists? Do you have an alternative view? Support your answer with reason. If you are baffled or confused, as I sometimes still am, by split brain phenomena and cannot support any answer to this question, elaborate on what you find so confusing. So this is a philosophy class. We've learned a lot of things that don't strictly count as philosophy, but now I'm asking you to say, as best you understand it, admitting that you could be wrong, uh, where is this consciousness? What is it? What is it that is conscious, has conscious experiences, um, given what we've seen? And try to relate your answer. Not pushing you to pick any one person. I'm definitely not pushing you to pick me just because I'm teaching the class, right? We assess your answers not based on agreeing with us or me agreeing with me, but on how well you support your view. And uh, so I would hate to think that someone who seems to agree is just doing it because they're in a class taught by that person. Uh, I want to know what you really think. So, are you a brain? Is there some center, some region where there's the kind of the real you, or are you an immaterial entity somehow in causal interaction with the brain? Is it something else? What view makes most sense? And if you have two competing views, then you can write on that. Okay, so that's published. It is 9:48. Um, I'll give you till about 9:58 to write on this. Okay? And I'll be back at 9:58, 9:59. Okay, welcome back. We are now everyone's back, and I saw a lot of people speaking, so I tried to let that last minute stretch out a little. I'm going to mute everyone because I thought I heard some background noise. And let's hear from room number one.
All right. Um, so my group, we were talking a lot about, well, generally we agreed loosely on the fact that the brain can be independently conscious of each other. But we focused a lot on the corpus callosum and how
Mhm.
that's sort of a center for unifying the consciousness. So in a non-split brain patient, while the hemispheres and parts of the brain may be capable of being independently conscious of each other, the corpus callosum would synthesize that consciousness into like one unified and like easily, I don't know to say accessible or
Mhm.
usable.
Mhm.
Um, but I thought that the corpus callosum seems to be a center for combining the consciousness into one. And when we split that, it would force them to be independently conscious and just unable to communicate to each other. So they would still be one conscious entity, like one conscious person, but it would be with certain restrictions to that consciousness. They wouldn't be able to access or use both hemispheres of the brain at the same time as easily, was kind of the view
Interesting.
talking
So,
about.
thank you, McCade. In virtue of what is it one conscious person, though? If you have two different, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but don't you, are you saying there are two different conscious systems that are no longer interacting?
Yeah, but I think I would maintain that it is still one conscious person, even though there isn't that interaction. I think that their
Yeah,
systems are still aligned in that way. It's just their faculties are limited a little bit.
yeah, yeah. Was there any were there alternative views in your group, or did you kind of meet in the center, or what?
We mostly met in the center. There were some, I don't know if any of my other group members want to speak up and show their views.
Yeah, they're welcome to do so.
Um, there were some other views. We were talking also about the Swinburne view that the
Mhm.
and that might be an explanation. We were talking about your view as well, as and kind of unifying. My idea was to unify your view with Ramachandran's a little bit,
Okay.
in that it can like each section of the brain I think could be independently conscious of each other, but they are still separated by the severance of the corpus callosum, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. And what was said about Swinburne?
I can speak to that a little bit because
Go
I was
ahead,
the
Layla.
one that said something about Richard Swinburne's claim that consciousness might be an immaterial soul because we've seen all these studies where literal halves of the brain can be taken out and we still have consciousness.
Yeah.
So I kind of believe that either is intertwined in almost every part of the brain, or that it is a separate thing that just works in tandem with our brain. So when pieces of it are cut out and we still have consciousness, it's because it's not really a part of our brain, or it's just intertwined so closely with our brain that it doesn't matter if pieces are taken out because it's in every piece. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes some sense. It's in every piece. You might be voicing support for what's called panpsychism, and maybe you know this. I'll put the word in the chat window. Panpsychism, which has kind of had it's having its day, or it has been having its years. It's many years at this point. Um, and panpsychism is the view that everything is in some sense, in some very fundamental raw sense, conscious, which was a view that people disregarded and downplayed and ridiculed for a long time. If you had a theory and someone could show that your theory of consciousness grants consciousness to a bunch of other things, that was considered an embarrassment. It was a reductio ad absurdum. And lately, people who have struggled with the mind body problem throughout their careers, even, um, and thought a lot about it, talked a lot about it, written a lot about it, researched it, uh, have found better reason to embrace something like that. And so maybe, so the brain is conscious in some sense. It also has volume and it also has mass and it has energy. Okay. Now notice that the brain's volume it has that volume in virtue of being composed of things with volume. It has that mass in virtue of being composed of things with mass, etc. And so some of us have become much more sympathetic with this idea that maybe just things are have some kind of fundamental consciousness, just like they have mass and the rest. That's not to say that a grain of sand is thinking about what it's like to be a grain of sand and having memories and desires and plans to meet those goals and all that. That's not to say that cognition, along with consciousness, would be a very different thing. But maybe the building blocks of consciousness lie in everything or almost everything, or at least parts of brains. So that's called panpsychism. Uh, do uh, do you, Layla, or McCade, want to say any more?
I think I said what I wanted to, but I could definitely get behind panpsychism. I think that's an interesting idea for sure.
Yeah, and because without panpsychism, you have to answer the question: how do atoms, when arranged a certain way, how do they suddenly become conscious? Uh, and so the mind body problem seems to haunt almost every account of consciousness. Uh, and you can still ask it of panpsychism, but uh, what you don't, as a panpsychist, as someone who believes in panpsychism, you don't have to explain how once things get arranged a certain way, suddenly you get consciousness. Just like you don't have to explain how when when things get moved around a certain way, you suddenly have more mass, right? Uh, okay. I mean, the emphasis is on sudden. Of course, if an object gets made more dense, it will get more mass. So I didn't mean to raise that issue. Okay, thank you, McCade and Layla. Let's hear from room two.
Okay, I am representing room two.
Hi, Grace.
Hi. So we had about half of our room members really sort of coinciding with Yair Pinto.
Hmm.
It seemed like Naomi, Sierra, and Marco sort of agreed with that idea that even though if our brain is split, there's still only one conscious being. Um, we all were kind of just like, and I feel free anyone to please step in, but like it felt like we were all sort of iffy on it, but it was kind of like they didn't really know if the split brain was two separate conscious things or one whole. So it was kind of like a little bit of like a we don't really know consensus.
Mhm.
Um, And then Estella brought up the experiment done on rats and how the people who conducted it removed like more and more pieces of the brain and put them through the maze, and they were still able to be active, or there was some activity still present.
Mhm.
And what I garnered from her ideas was that like consciousness, she equated consciousness to being able to actively do something. So whether that's, I think, like speaking or moving. Um, and she thought it was like important to sort of bring up that experiment and how she believed that like consciousness can still occur with parts of the brain removed.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know, Estella, if I had caught which sort of person you thought was the most aligned with your views, but feel free to say something um if you do. And then Hind said that consciousness can exist in multiple brain regions if they work independently. um and then my person that I felt I most aligned with was actually Swinburne. I think that there our brains are like a machine or like a computer, and that our souls are like the information that's run through it. Um,
Mhm.
and like the brain is conscious in this, like the same way that a machine is like on, I feel like, and the soul is the input that um lights up certain areas of the brain. And so I feel like the brain, like all parts of the brain are conscious in a sense, but it's like the soul um that decides which part is like fully active. I don't know. But I definitely like agreed with Swinburne um as a whole. And kind of like the brain, almost like the brain is only conscious because the soul is conscious, was my idea.
Okay, so wow, you've said a lot and you've covered many views in your group. Your group covered many views. So about half the room um, held that the split brain patient is still one conscious entity, even if there's some division. And it sounded like many members of the room also agreed we can't really know. So maybe there's nothing testable here, or maybe they're just saying we don't know yet. And Hind holds that in regions can be independently conscious, regions of the brain. And then you're more taken with Swinburne's view. And in describing it, you said some things that Swinburne would want to add to. So, some people disagree with Swinburne, but they'll say, yeah, the consciousness is the activity of the brain. And yet the activity of the brain doesn't necessarily require like a soul, like an immaterial entity in causal interaction. So I am curious, are you, you know, Swinburne is claiming there's some immaterial, independent thing that interacts with it. So are you thinking something like that, or are you saying something that you might think of as a weaker claim, which is just the soul, quote unquote, soul is just activity, brain activity?
I think what makes most sense to me is to, I think the first thing you said, like he has a quote that Swinburne says, being a person is not a truth of the physical world, it's a truth about something immaterial in causal connection with the physical world. And I think that is what really brought me to like, that just makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I feel like if you replace the term physical world with the brain, like
Mhm.
it's kind of yeah, that's what I believe. So maybe I do think that even though it's not as testable, like the soul does sort of represent brain activity, but I just feel like there's some kind of like essence of who a person is that
Mhm.
can't be explained like by just like brain function. So I feel like they're just more like in causal interaction with each other.
Okay, good. Thanks, Grace. Thank you. Uh, right. So to clarify a view like Swinburne's. Now, I'm not saying Swinburne believes this can happen, but it's if you believe that there's the brain and then there's an immaterial entity that we'll call a soul that causally interacts with it, it's conceivable that that immaterial soul start causally interacting with a different brain, right? So it's conceivable that you like suddenly wake up in a different body. Or it's also conceivable that if the brain dies, the soul continues on in like whether it's in an afterlife or just wherever it is. Um, and so that's the kind of that's a strong kind of dualism, and that goes beyond saying, well, you have the brain, which is just material, but then you have the activity or the energy or something, somehow what it does, and that's a, I would say, a weaker claim, not to denigrate it, but just it's not requiring as much. And Swinburne is making the stronger claim, and I think Grace is sympathetic with that stronger claim. Uh, uh, Good. Okay. Okay. So, was there, if anyone else from room two wants to speak up, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll move on to room three. Alejandro, Darla, Emma. Okay, there you are, Emily.
Yeah, so my group was kind of mixed on our opinions. There was a few people who were confused on it, but like still held some kind of idea. There's a few people who aligned. Sorry, my dog is he's making noises. Anyways, um, some people who aligned more with the one consciousness idea. There's one person who aligned more with the two consciousnesses. Um, and then let me see. Another person who thought specific areas of the brain were independently conscious. One person, I wasn't exactly sure where they aligned. They thought the brain worked as like a single unit. So I don't know if that would align more with panpsychism or the one consciousness idea. I kind of align more with the one consciousness and um, sorry, my dog's in the background. And Swinburne's idea of us having a soul, because I think having a soul would mean you'd have one consciousness. At least in my mind, that would make the most sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's kind of all I really have on it. We had to talk through the chat because there's a lot of people who couldn't talk. So yeah.
Okay. 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 Thank you, Emily. So, so there are a variety of views. I think almost every view was accepted, except I haven't heard anyone take Gazanaga's 1980s view that the only the left hemisphere is conscious. But that's maybe not a surprise because it's kind of fallen out of favor, even with Gazzaniga himself. And again, I think what he was thinking of is when he thought of consciousness, he was requiring self-consciousness with a self-identity where you attach all these things to yourself. Like I was born in Los Angeles and I went to this school and I have this job, and if that's what you're requiring of consciousness, then you do seemingly need a language dominant hemisphere that can produce the language and therefore the theory to have that self-awareness. But that's not what most people are discussing, and we believe that most of us believe that dogs and cats and other non-human animals have a robust conscious life, even though they don't have anything like human language. And so that's probably why Gazzaniga has moved away from that view as well. But it was an expressed view. It was probably more, not probably, it was more common for people to believe that in the 1980s, 1970s, et cetera. And Emily, you said that you do think there's just one consciousness, and that the Swinburne account would support that. I am curious, for those of you who said in that group that there's one consciousness, whether it's the Swinburne view or the Pinto view, did anyone give a reason? Um, Emily, if you remember someone giving a reason, you can tell us. And if anyone in room 3 wants to give a reason, you might say, go ahead.
No, I can't remember people's reasoning specifically, but there wasn't a lot of elaboration because they were typing through the chat. For me, my one consciousness idea, I also feel like might have maybe aligned with panpsychism. I might have to look more into that, and I feel like my views overall, I might have to like do like a little bit more studying to kind of refine it. But yeah, I sorry, let me figure out how to word this. Hang on one second. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I can't figure out a way to elaborate more. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, so some people say we need to explain the appearance of unity, right? It just seems like it's me. It's just one conscious experience I'm having, and there's people around me having their conscious experiences, but it's I don't have double vision. I don't. It's not like I try to do something and then there's resistance and I feel like I'm constantly combating some other entity, right? So by introspection, you might say it sure seems like there's just one conscious entity in here, in this cranium at least. Uh, for those of you who are interested, I didn't realize that I hadn't posted my work on this. So it's optional, of course, but I've published twice on this, and in the second publication, there's a section devoted to that. So it's noted in the link. So if you just go back to that week, I think it's 2 weeks ago, you'll find the optional uh, links. And the second paper, which is not just about this view, it's uh, criticizing a neuroscientific theory of consciousness called integrated information theory. Um, that paper has a section 4, where I address the appeal to introspectionism and the weird counterintuitiveness of saying that there are multiple independent conscious entities. Alejandro wrote, I was thinking of dual transferability into a single state of consistent consciousness. Maybe when you say that, you're thinking of two hemispheres, somehow the two streams being united. And going back to room 1, McCade said you talked a lot about the corpus callosum as kind of being that place where consciousness comes together. Most neuroscientists, so it's something I meant to say back then and forgot. I think most neuroscientists would say um, a lot of people would think that's a good idea, but maybe it wouldn't be the corpus callosum because that's kind of like a bridge. It's not a center where a lot of processing gets done. It's axons that is fibers sending signals back and forth. However, you might be so when you look at brain anatomy, you might think, okay, maybe not so much the corpus callosum, but who knows, maybe it's something in the subcortical regions like the thalamus. Yeah. Okay, thank you, group. Room 3, let's hear from room 4. Bobby, Bria, Marilyn, Tavia, Whitney, and Zaw.
Okay, you hear
Room
me?
4. Hi.
All right, yeah. So our group, we discussed like a few like ideas. We kind of tossed around like a little bit. But I would say that our group, we kind of like leaned like more so like on the pan psychism, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And like the what is it, the split brain theory. We felt like that, like, yes, like our left side of our brain, like the left hemisphere, is more um dominant with its side of the, it's conscious, and whatever like your left side of your brain is responsible for, like, if it's like speech or like, like writing or language, whatever it may be, that it whatever side is more active, that's what level of conscious. Like, we believe that each region of your brain has like its own independent conscious, and whatever you're doing or whatever you're learning or whatever you've adapted to over time, like that part of the region controls like the more dominant conscience that you're experiencing. I would say like it's like a dial, right? Like you can turn up like your level of conscious, but each side of your brain communicates to allow whatever is the more dominant, conscious that your body or your brain has decided it wants to utilize. So like I always feel like we have like that small voice in the back of our head, but that could be like a different hemisphere of our brain or a different region of our brain trying to turn up its volume in what we're doing, or it wants to convey something, and that like our brain communicates and like with each other, like with itself in the different regions, to allow a more amplified consciousness, if that makes sense.
It, um, to the extent that it can make sense, I think so. I'm quite sympathetic with that, and but it's very confusing. So it's hard to describe, and so I think you did a good job trying to describe it. I like this idea of like a dial, like different regions becoming somehow more active and perhaps more conscious as a result. I actually just mentioned integrated information theory, which some of you may have. I'm curious, green checks, please, if you've heard of integrated information theory. Probably not many of you, but if you're in a class like this, the probability is higher that you might have heard of it. Uh, there's a psychologist, cognitive scientist, Giulio Tononi, who's been pushing this view now for years. I see Gustavo's heard of it. And uh, but I've seen so far only one. Uh, and so he does argue that the brain can have islands of consciousness. So it might be that the some part of the left hemisphere is conscious while some part of the right hemisphere is conscious, and they might be interacting with each other. Uh, he this does not require a split brain, right? And he's not alone in thinking about this, that there can be islands of consciousness. We know also, I don't think I mentioned this, that some animals sleep one hemisphere at a time. So dolphins and some seals will sleep one hemisphere at a time. So without like a WADA test or a, a, a split brain procedure, you can get, it seems, independently conscious entities. Araceli, his name is Tononi, Giulio Tononi, and the theory is called integrated information theory. Now, I'll warn you that it does get a lot of criticism, and some people think it there are some neuroscientists who have casted a lot of aspersion on it and say it's really not real science. Okay. Uh, and then they have their defense. So there was kind of this debate in the neuroscience of consciousness about whether this rose to the level of a scientific theory. It's interesting, and I write pretty critically about it in that article, because the one thing Tononi won't allow is overlap, and I argue that that creates all kinds of weird challenges and problems, and we should just bite the bullet and accept that you can have two overlapping conscious entities. It makes a lot more, just like you can have two overlapping massive objects, right? Or you have the left 2/3 of this table overlaps the right 2/3 of this desk table. There's the overlap, that's the middle third, right? And we can talk scientifically about the mass and the volume and energy and the heat even, et cetera. No problem. But for some reason, a lot of people want to say, including Tononi, that you can't have overlap. Anyways, wanted to just and if you go look at the optional paper, you can see what I think about all that. Good. So let's hear from room 5. Thank you, Bobby Ray.
So we mostly agreed that there is one consciousness, one being within the body, and kind of what we talked about for like the proof of that or the reasoning. We looked into internal family systems and how in that theory, in that system, or yeah, in that theory of psychology, there's like different parts of you. You have like the critic, the managers, the exiles, etc. And although those are like really important parts of you, parts that make decisions for you sometimes or influence your decisions, they're in the subconscious. They're not necessarily separate consciousnesses. Um,
Right.
so I guess with that logic in mind, we kind of came to the conclusion that even though when you have a split brain patient and they make, decisions that their right hemisphere was unaware of, like catching a ball, or they answer very important questions like, do you believe in God differently? That doesn't necessarily prove that it is two separate beings or two separate consciousnesses. It's just part of your subconscious or a part of you. We talked a lot about souls, and how it's one soul, but there's different parts. Like, I'm gonna say your name wrong, Arakeli, Arakeli?
It's Araceli.
Araceli, sorry. Araceli was talking about how there's like her childhood self and then her like there's different parts of her, but she is one soul, one person, one being. I think the other part was that it? Oh, we talked about an example of this, like to give it more of a picture, is like a person with body dysmorphia. We wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily look at them and be like, oh, there's two consciousnesses in you, one that sees you as fat and one that sees you as ugly, or sorry, one that sees you as skinny. Um,
Mhm.
you wouldn't think that those are two different people. It's just two parts of your brain. And even though those are very like real and you experience seeing yourself in two very different ways, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have two people inside of you or two consciousnesses inside of you.
Okay, okay. And yeah, and that would explain the dysmorphia because it seems like there has to be a center at which those two impressions or attitudes are in tension, right? And if they were just held by two separate entities, then you wouldn't necessarily have that tension. Uh, so thank you, Madeline. I didn't realize how close we are to the end. Uh, thank you very much. That was very clearly presented. Let's hear from the last room, room 6.
All right. So for group 6, we would say we kind of I would break it off into like two groups. I would say me and Aries, where we kind of agreed with Richard Swinburne's interpretation. We thought that there is like an independent conscience. I believe it's your soul. I don't know if Aries believes it's a soul specifically, but we believe that there's some independent. The conscious is independent and it interacts with the brain, and the idea that like we both disagreed that like there's we're only conscious in the left hemisphere of the brain, like Gazanika said, and
Mhm.
the idea that in your theory that we that each part of the brain is independently conscious. I know for me personally, I have a hard time just kind of um I don't know, accepting that theory only because it doesn't feel that way, similar to what
Yeah.
and they were saying in the last group. Just because you're having these different thoughts and different opinions on different things, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't know, it doesn't feel like there's a separate conscience for you. And the other group, or the other opinion in our group, I would say Krizia was presenting it the best. She said um, that in her opinion, the consciousness is just kind of results of all the different brain functions that we have going on. So we'll have all of different functions in different regions of the brain, and the results of all of these, the brain and all these functions coming together is us being conscious beings. And even if we remove some of these things, then we could still be conscious. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so good. Thank you for you said a lot in a very short period of time, so I really appreciate that. Krizia wrote VAP. I'm not sure what the reference is.
The action
Um,
potential.
Yeah.
oh, okay. The action potential of neurons. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Uh, and so I think you said, Jerome, it was you and Aries who were sympathetic with Swinburne.
Yes.
Okay. And okay. I feel like I have to cut it off there. In a direct message, someone asked about the exam. So the exam is Thursday next week. And I uh, will be holding office hours as usual, but if anyone wants to meet and review, I have some flexibility. Just let me know. So I didn't know that it still says TBA in the schedule. I'll update that right now. So thanks for pointing that out in the direct message. And then there will be some harmless quizzes. The slides will be posted. Today's record, I think all the recordings up until now have been posted, but today's will be posted, and then I'll update the schedule. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, bye.
I have a quick question. For the test on Thursday, will we be joining class and doing it during the Zoom, or will we
No,
have class that day? Or we
it
just
we will not. We won't have class that day. It will be like the last exam. So a window from 8 to 11:59 p.m.
all right, and so
Yeah,
that would mean that we don't have class on Tuesday or Thursday next week.
that's right. Just the exam on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And Alejandro, yeah, there will be harmless quizzes posted. Yeah. Okay. Take care, everyone.
I also have a question. Sorry, this
Oh,
is related to the multiple or different I don't know. I was trying to think about different entities of consciousness and then also like the individual as like one conscious or if they have multiple levels of like rather than it being one individual or I don't know. I guess my question is how would you explain multiple personality disorder if you just had one conscious individual? Or
so it sounded like you were exploring two different things. So the first thing that you said made me want to reply that uh, on the view that I hold, there can still be one like whole conscious entity. I'm just saying that there are parts that we have reason to believe are independently conscious. So that's my view. Um, and I hold it, not with high certainty. But then when you brought up multiple personality disorder, um, this is debated. My understanding is it's still somewhat controversial. And there's kind of like the Hollywood version, which apparently is just uh, not real. But there are variations, and I'm not sure that we need independently conscious regions to explain that. But I don't have the clinical training to address that. I just don't know what to make of that. If you have a specific like idea, I'd be interested. But
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know. I just thought it was interesting because people were talking about like in the individual, like, oh, you can't fight. Maybe I'm also thinking of the Hollywood definition of multiple personality disorder, but it was talking about like, oh, well, somebody can't fight
you from doing something else because it's like at least what we are talking about in Bobby's group too. It's like you can turn on the dials and like, but when I thought about maybe multiple personality disorder, it perhaps might not be like a choice of whether or not you turn on the dials, and
Yeah.
it just kind of like happens.
Well, so with schizophrenia, there is this theory that the regions of the brain are out of sync. And so most of us, when we think our thoughts, we think of them as our thoughts. And according to this theory, if they come in a little later or maybe earlier, I forget which way it goes, they feel intrusive, and you think of them as hearing voices, thinking thoughts that you didn't want to think. Um, it's really interesting. I feel like at this point I should have looked more closely at multiple personality disorder, but I've just never been able to do it.
Is there any like I don't know. I guess I'm still questioning my viewpoint the on what we've talked about today. I'm just like I still don't feel like I have a solid understanding of what my opinion is because I think it's multiple different types of things, perhaps.
I think that's normal.
Yeah.
Like we we think in a sometimes because these are new ideas, and concepts like self and person and consciousness are they're vague and malleable and fuzzy. And so when we try to say something, we end up, you know, some people are saying that, there's one consciousness, but then there's conscious parts. Um, that's kind of what I've been saying, right? Um, what I would say, what I would add to that is there's not just one special conscious part, or one self. Uh, but we heard others who kind of maybe went back and forth between there's one soul to um, there's still somehow this diversity. Uh, so yeah, it wouldn't be weird if you still haven't made up your mind. Uh, and I personally try to avoid talking about people like in the publications because the concept of a person is multifaceted and it's ambiguous. People use it in all different ways, and it can be semantic. I don't want this to become a semantic issue. Um, I think the question if you're going to remove a hemisphere, a brain hemisphere, and let's say this is someone who's otherwise quite healthy, um, everyone would object to that if there's no reason because they'd be saying you're incapacitating one person. But I think we also have to ask: are you making an independently conscious region die, like making it unconscious? Um, right? I don't think that's a matter of semantics. I think that's a really important medical question.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
I agree. I'd agree with that for sure.
And we've seen, so there's the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. They can both interact with the world. Um, And I can imagine Ramachandran asking the right hemisphere, "Do you mind if we excise you from the cranium?" And it's saying, "Absolutely, I mind, right? Please don't." Yeah. Now, in the case of actual hemispherectomies, the hemispheres are have been damaged in serious ways.
Mm.
So the concern is not as pressing. It's important. It's just not, we're not talking about um, an intact brain.
Mm. Cool. Okay, well, I just thought I'd ask that because I was like, I wonder if wonder if yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting and bizarre all at the same time. Um,
Yeah, if you want sources, if you want to pursue it, just send me an email. I can send you some links or books or articles or videos.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye.